I was getting tired of sharing a shoebox apartment with a careless roommate in the middle of a loud and cluttered city. I wanted something more peaceful and slow-paced, with more space for not only myself, but also my gardening. I had a small balcony garden I'd started at the apartment, but my dream garden consisted of a bit more than 3 crammed tomato plants. I decided I wanted to take the step of buying a home. I was lucky enough to have a good earning job, and the cost of rent for the little prison cell of an apartment I lived in allowed me to save a decent amount of money. I wanted to move out of the city and head to the country roads that spread into the farmers' fields. I actually started looking over a year ago, but nothing really called out to me. Nothing seemed like a good fit, until I saw this listing. It was a beautiful 2-story farmhouse on a fairly large lot. The property backed onto a lovely forest, and it had existing gardening plots in the backyard. The house itself had a gorgeous wraparound porch with a cute little porch swing out front. The facade of the house looked a little run down, and the inside needed some updating and renovation, but the whole property had huge potential to be my dream home. An added bonus was the listing price. It was surprisingly affordable, which, in hindsight, I should have questioned more, but at the time I didn't think too much about it. What did strike me as odd, though, were the amount of recent owners of the property. After chatting with the realtor, I found out that this house had changed hands about 3 times in the past couple years. When I viewed the house, I noticed a few more things that would need attention. So I assumed the previous owners had gotten in a bit over their heads with renovations and just wanted to get rid of the place. Everyone always talks about renovating a house, but when you get down to the amount of hours and dollars that go into that, it turns out to be easier said than done. And ironically, or hypocritically, that's exactly what I've always dreamed of, and what I wanted to do with the place. I was able to move ahead with an offer, but made sure to have multiple inspectors take a look at the house before making any serious decisions. I also have a friend who's worked in the trades for years, so he also took a look around to make sure there was nothing devastating on my renovation horizon. After covering my bases and moving through the process, the house soon became mine. Upon moving in, I got my first shock of reality. I had no furniture. I had to cram all of my stuff into that tiny apartment, but after moving it into the house, I realized how little I had. I had 1 set of dishware and cutlery, 1 couch, a coffee table, and a bed. Before I even touched renovations, I guess I'd need to do some furniture shopping. I spent my first day putting away my clothes and toiletries, and started mapping out what kinds of furniture I'd need and where to put everything. And as the day turned to night, I got my second shock. It's stupid dark out in the country. I was used to some light pollution from the city, but now I only have the lights from inside my house, my few dim porch lights, and some solar-powered lights in the garden that were left by the previous owner. Beyond my little bubble of light, it was pitch black. I didn't like the feeling of anyone being able to see inside my house at night, despite my neighbors being few and far between. It gave me an uneasy feeling. I felt exposed and vulnerable, but I only had 1 set of curtains, and I'd already put them up in my bedroom, so I made a mental note to buy more sets the next day. As I was unpacking my last box of items in the kitchen, I glanced up to the kitchen window that faced out to the backyard. I could vaguely see my reflection in the glass. and I shifted my focus to look past my reflection and out the window. The solar lights in the garden gave the backyard a soft glow, and I could see the tree lines sitting just beyond. The longer I looked out the window, the stronger that uneasy feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. I felt like my eyes were trying to land on something, like I should have been seeing something, but couldn't. At this point, I was almost feeling nauseous. I decided I just wanted to go to bed. I chalked up my unease to it being my first night in a new home, in a new environment. I just wasn't used to my new space yet. I flicked off the lights on the main floor and made my way upstairs. After I brushed my teeth and washed my face, I walked over to my bedroom window and opened it, letting in some cool summer night air. As I turned to walk over to my closet to change, I heard a sound outside, a twig or a branch snapping. I paused. I was tempted to look out the window, but first I quickly moved across the room to turn off my bedroom light, and the room went dark. I walked back over to the window and peeked out, straining my eyes to adjust to the darkness. After scanning the backyard, something caught my eye. For a split second, I thought I saw something move just past the reach of the solar lights. Though the movement was small, the thing that moved looked big. I stood frozen at the window, my heart racing a little bit. What was in my backyard? After a quick moment, I took a deep breath and told myself I was being silly. I reminded myself that I was out in the country now, where these things called animals live. It was likely just a deer, or maybe even a bear. I needed to get used to hearing things outside now. And with an exhale, I closed my curtains and went to bed. The next morning, I'd almost completely forgotten about what happened the night before. I made myself some breakfast and got back to organizing the house. I knew I wanted to get outside and clean up the garden beds a bit. It was too late to start anything for this year, but the beds were a mess, so I planned to get them cleaned up so they'd be ready to go for next season. I pulled on my rubber boots and grabbed my sun hat and my little bag of gardening tools. As I descended down the deck stairs, I decided to start at the back plots first. I walked down the overgrown stone pathway and got to work. The beds were insanely overgrown with weeds and covered in debris. It was gonna be a lot of work getting these gardens ready, but I found this work calming and peaceful, especially now that the ambient sounds were birds chirping and trees rustling in the breeze, instead of cars honking and my neighbor blowing their cigarette smoke in my face. I was about halfway through the first bed when I turned to put down some pulled weeds. I happened to glance up and paused. The last row of garden beds was about 10 feet from the forest, and about 2 feet in front of the tree line. I noticed a worn-down path. At first, I assumed it was a deer path or something. Maybe it was a common place for animals to pass through. But as I looked at it closer, I realized that it didn't go through my backyard. The trampled grass and compacted dirt stopped at each side of my property. It looked like someone or something had been pacing back and forth from one side of the property to the other for quite some time. I sat back on my heels and stared. I was confused. Was this normal? Did animals typically pace like that? I continued examining it. As my eyes shifted from one side to the other, I saw that at the dead center of the trail, another trail led away and into the trees. What was this? I sat in the dirt, my mind racing. I remembered back to the night before and felt a small wave of anxiety. That trail is where I saw the thing move. Frankly, if I hadn't felt so creeped out and seen whatever it was move the night before, I probably wouldn't have thought twice about this path. But what I'd seen and felt, in addition to this odd trail, sparked this deep sense of dread. Something about it was off. I continued observing the area, scanning the path again and looking at the tree line. The forest was dense with trees and had a thick canopy, so it was very dark past the first few rows of trees. I couldn't see more than a few feet into the forest. And I again felt my eyes searching for something, but I couldn't find what it was. Looking into the forest was like staring into an ink pot. Although my anxiety remained, I kept cleaning the gardens. Except now, I didn't let my back turn to the tree line. After a few hours, I headed inside for lunch. I walked up the back steps and tried to open the screen door, but the handle was jammed. I had to fiddle with it for a few seconds, but I eventually got it open. Guess I need to add replacing this door to my to-do list, I said out loud to myself, then went inside. After I finished my delicious bologna and cheese sandwich, I drove into the city to buy curtains. I purchased a set for each and every window in my house and spent the rest of the afternoon placing them. And as the sun began to set, I made sure all of them were pulled closed. I went on for a while with the same routine. In the morning, I would open the curtains. I still had a slight sense of unease throughout the day, but it was manageable enough that I felt okay having the curtains open. I'd go about my day, still working outside if I needed to, but trying my best to stay far from the tree line. Then, once the sun began to set, I would go around my house and close the curtains. I made myself a strict rule that I wouldn't go outside after dusk. But every night, I would peek out of my bedroom window, and each time I did, I would catch a glimpse of it move. Some nights it was more obvious than others, but as each night passed, I became more and more certain that there was something strange out there. And what made me so nervous was that it seemed to know to stay just outside of the solar light's reach. It understood that I was looking for it, and it knew to stay hidden. From what I was able to see, it looked too big to be a person, which, in a sense, was a relief. I definitely didn't want a random person stalking me from the forest, but I couldn't think for the life of me what kind of animal would act like this. But the next night, I would get my answer. The day went as usual. I did my morning routine of opening the curtains and got some more yard work done outside. I had some lunch, did some laundry, and after I had my dinner, I did my usual ritual of closing the curtains. A few hours later, I was sitting on my couch, watching a movie. I'd made some popcorn and was sipping on a Diet Coke. During a quiet part of the movie, I heard a twig snap outside. It was out pacing again. I felt that wave of anxiety wash over me, but this time, I also felt this strong pull of curiosity. Throughout these weeks, I had never really cared to see what it was. Of course, I was curious, but my routine seemed to keep it at bay and allowed me to carry on in a mostly normal fashion. I kept telling myself it was just an animal, to just leave it be. I'm not sure what changed, but I think in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't an animal. I knew something was wrong, and I felt a need to see what it was. I paused my movie and went to the basement to get my flashlight. I stood at the far side of my kitchen, staring at the back door. My heart was racing, and I was sweating a bit. I turned the kitchen light off and slowly walked to the door. With a careful hand, I moved the curtain so I could see outside. I saw that familiar shadow just outside the solar lights, moving ever so slightly. I placed my shaking hand on the door handle and turned it as quietly as I could. I pulled the door open, then opened the screen door and stepped onto the back porch. Aside from the solar lights, it was pitch black outside. It was also deathly quiet. There was no wind, no chittering of late-night critters. There wasn't even the sound of crickets. I felt like I was in a soundproof bubble. Just me and whatever creature stood at the other side of my backyard. I knew it had stopped pacing. I didn't have to see it to know that. I could feel it staring at me. We both stood there for what seemed like an hour, like we were waiting for the other to make the first move. And after a few deep breaths, I made the move. I aimed the flashlight at the other side of the yard and flicked it on. Every ounce of blood in my body turned to ice. I almost couldn't comprehend what I was looking at. What stood before me was a creature I couldn't even imagine in my nightmares. It was taller than any human I'd ever seen, maybe 9 or 10 feet tall, with skeletal arms that almost reached the ground, and spindly fingers just long enough to close the distance. Its skin looked rough and textured. It was the color of molded meat. My eyes landed on its face that was focused directly on me. Its small, pinprick eyes glowed like it had a light bulb in its head. I was in shock, terrified of what I was looking at. And suddenly, the creature screeched. It was deafening, a cacophony of noise that sounded like several different animals all screaming at once. I instinctively reached to cover my ears, and in doing so, I dropped my flashlight. It broke, and everything went dark. As the clattering of the flashlight subsided, I heard a different sound. I looked up and saw the creature was charging at me, angrily clawing through the gardens, screeching and growling. I stumbled back, almost falling over the rickety wooden boards. I turned and tried to find the door handle, but it was so dark I could barely see anything. I frantically ran my hands over the side of the house and felt a sense of relief when I found the handle. I pulled on it to open the door, but it didn't budge. The handle jammed. No, 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 I whimpered. I glanced over my shoulder and could see the creature lumbering past the front garden beds, its glowing eyes locked on me. It was almost at the porch steps. Anxiety and fear burning in my chest, I turned back, frantically fiddling with the handle, and finally, I felt the handle give. I yanked open the door and fell inside, pulling it closed and moving to close the wooden door as I heard the creature's nails scratch and dig into the wood of the porch. I managed to close the door just as the creature's thin fingers landed on the glass. The creature stood at the door, its piercing eyes boring into me as it chattered and screeched, tapping its jagged nails on the window. And we sat there, staring at each other. And after what felt like forever, the creature broke its gaze and slunk back off the porch. I scrambled to my feet, locking the door and peering out the window. And I watched the shadow of the creature crawl back through the dimly lit garden and into the trees, disappearing as its form melted into the blackness around it. I backed away from the door and ran upstairs. I locked my bedroom door and stood by my window. An hour or so passed, and I didn't see or hear anything else. I closed the curtain and got into bed. I obviously didn't get a wink of sleep. It's now been a week since that night. I haven't seen or heard it pacing since then. But now, I hear something worse. I don't know if I somehow invited it closer, piqued its interest, or just angered it. Every night, I hear it chittering and screeching outside, its sharp nails tapping on my windows. And sometimes, I even hear it dragging itself up the side of the house, tapping and growling outside my bedroom window, just feet away. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if this will ever end, or if it'll get worse. I can't sleep. I'm so riddled with fear and anxiety that I can barely force myself to leave my house, even in the daytime. I feel like I'm losing my mind.